Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tank12, having you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we have some very interesting news. Now, just 1 or 2 days ago, I have released a video where I did kind of bash World of Tanks and Wargaming for releasing the Minnie Mouse again and selling that tank at tier 2. I stand by that. I still think that it's a complete scumbag move, and I don't like that they are still selling these super powerful tier 2 tanks and ruining whatever kind of remaining new player base there is with those vehicles. But today we have the super test, and there are going to be some vehicle rebalancing things coming. Now, I'm just going to be very cautiously optimistic because I don't want to get your hopes up that everything is going to be fine, everything will be worked out. But they are finally taking a look at some of the tanks that really need to have a little bit of an overhaul, at least two of these vehicles. I'm talking about the Kranvagn and the Emil 2. Both the Kranvagn and the Emil 2 are incredibly strong because they have very hard-hitting guns with incredible good DPM, very good mobility, and a turret that is basically invincible if you are in a hull-down position. Add all that together, you have a tank or two tanks that are very powerful in their tier, and they ruin the matchmaking. They're not the only ones, no, certainly not, but they are two of the probably worst offenders in the game at the moment, tier for tier. That means that making something or doing something against that in the Kranvagn and the Emil 2 is probably the right step, and it's a step that has taken way too long for Wargaming. I don't care about any new content. If they just rework everything else that is in the game, they balance out things, they finally add in back some weak spots, then I think we might have a little bit of hope. I don't want to see new content. I don't care about new content. I have so much content that I can play in World Tanks. It's the old content that is so broken that needs to be looked at. And we're not just looking at that, because there's a whole line of vehicles that they are trying out in this super test iteration and in the next one. We're going to be also taking a look at the French heavy tanks. It's the Amex M4 line or the MLE line. That is the non-autoloaders, even though the autoloaders also need some work. I think it's nice that we get some other lines that need some adjustments. I think the Amex M4 MLE line, certainly at least the tier 8, the tier 7, and the tier 10, they are a bit lackluster. The tier 9 is great, maybe even too strong, but I think it's a tank that is in a good place. The tier 8 is one of those weird categories where the turret, which is stock, is better than the turret, which is fully upgraded. Tank itself is not that bad, it's just kind of lackluster. A lot of other vehicles at the same tier are better. And finally, they want to overwork the M44. Oh my god, I fucking hate that tank. I hate that vehicle. I almost wanted to say something that was going to be highly critical, but either way, we're going to take a look at some of the changes that they've been talking about. And you can see right here, these are actually quite substantial. On the Kranvagn and on the Emil 2, they are first and foremost going to reduce the mobility on the vehicles, which is a great step, in my opinion. 60 kilometers per hour top speed on the Kranvagn and 56 on the Emil 2 was quite ridiculous. And they are also nerfing the reverse speed, which means if you're on a ridgeline, you're trying to get out of harm's way, it's going to be a lot less fast, or you're going to be a lot slower than you were prior, which gives the enemy more opportunities to actually shoot you and deal damage. The dispersion has increased as well. Gun dispersion during traverse has gotten worse, reload time has increased. And I have to say, generally speaking, I think all of the characteristics that they've adjusted certainly make sense on the Kranvagn, because this tank is just performing way too well. But one of the main problems I already have with this update is they're not talking about any kind of fixes on the armor. One of the main reasons why these tanks are so annoying is because when they're in a hull down position on a ridgeline, you can touch them if they're right in front of you. Doesn't matter if you give them 0.4 dispersion at 100 meters. Doesn't matter if you take away some of their reverse speed. That's going to obviously be a problem for them if they're going to get engaged by several tanks. But if it's a one-on-one engagement and you're down there and he's up there, he still has that advantage of being able to pump 3 rounds into you, doing a massive 1,000, 400 or 300 damage, and you can barely scratch anything on his tank. So what we really need to see is some serious weak spots on these tanks. Why not add a cupola, you know? Add a small little cupola that you can actually hit on these tanks and just call it a day. I think with that, the Kranvagn would probably be much, much better. It still would have a decent turret front at at the front, but there's still a little bit of a cupola there, which allows you to actively engage him if you're close enough, if you have enough luck. I think generally speaking that would probably be a easy fix for a lot of the problems regarding the Swedish heavy tank line. The Emil 2, you can see it also decreases the mobility from 56 to 40, so that's 16 kph that you're losing. Certainly was needed. The dispersion gets worse, gun dispersion, the reload time gets worse, 30 seconds. And I still think, 30 seconds is still pretty good on the Emil 2. Also for the 100mm gun, it actually gets nerfed a little bit. But same problem here, turret is still very, very strong on this vehicle, and we don't have any kind of real weak spot right there. So I still think it's the first step into the right direction. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to be too negative. This is the first step in the right direction. It's the first glimmer of hope. It's this tiny glimmer of hope for us players who have been playing this game for such a long time. It's not going to be enough to get everyone back into the game and enjoying it, but it's going to be a start. What is really important is that they don't just stop with this, but that they go through every single tier 10 line or any broken tanks, and they look at them in a super test server where they can really, really take their time. I don't want them to break the game completely, but I want them to finally take a look at some of these tanks. What about the Chieftain? Shouldn't they realize that the Chieftain is performing exceptionally well out there? What about the Object 279E? It's not always about realism. These games are not realistic. This is an arcade game. War Thunder is a game. War Thunder is an arcade game as well. These games try to show somehow some kind of sense of realism, but at the same time, it's about the gameplay. It's about the experience. If you are not having fun, why should you play it? If the content is not fun, it should not be in the game. That's just my personal opinion, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at the French heavy tanks and what they're going to be doing with these. Now, I actually liked this line. I enjoyed the tier 7. The tier 7 was a lot of fun. It just didn't have any armor. That's what they're going to be fixing. They're going to add armor onto the upper plate, so 195 millimeters, 200 on the turret at the front, and it finally will look like a heavy tank and not just like some kind of sad French long baguette. With 1,400 hit points. I think this is definitely a good change. It will go into the area of maybe a IS tank and maybe a T-29. 195 millimeters of frontal armor sounds excessive. So you have to probably aim at the lower plate. It will make this tank completely different. We're going to take a close look at this line once the changes come to the test server, and I'm going to inform you guys if it is worth it or not. Now, moving on, we have the AMX 65T, and you can see the turret is quite a bit of a funny looking turret. Gun dispersion will go down even when moving the turret and the hull. You can see it goes down quite substantially. Hit points will be increased. The reload time goes down for the 12 centimeter gun. It was one of the main reasons why everyone was using the 100mm gun, because it was just more competitive, and using the 120mm gun was just not really a viable option. The aim time goes down, gun dispersion goes even further down, but nothing about the armor. So one of the main problems with this tank was the armor, and I think it still is the armor. So I would like to see a little bit of an increase in armor, at least maybe on the upper plate or something along those lines, because you can just cut right through it. But other than that, I think it's a good start to get these vehicles into a certain line where they are better. Now about the tier 9, I think the tier 9 itself is already in a pretty good state. The tier 9 is a lot of fun. It has a lot of armor and it works really well with the 120mm gun. And basically the tier 10, when that one came into the game, it didn't add anything on top of the tier 9. So it's just a copy and paste kind of vehicle that they put into tier 10, and they thought, you know, we're just going to call this the tier 10 because you have to have an end. So in the end, I think personally, tier 9 is fine. They are going to nerf it a little bit. As I can see, the hull traverse goes down. And we are also going to have better dispersion, so that's great when moving the tank. So the tank will be a lot more, well, you might not even need vert stabs. That's going to be quite nice. Moving on to the tier 10, and the tier 10 has an increased armor profile, or more armor on the side, which it probably needed. It increased HP, which is nice, yes. Hull traverse speed has been decreased by 4 degrees per second, which means it's going to be less mobile. But you get better gun dispersion while moving and while traversing. The second shell, the premium shell, Wargaming is so scared of using that term because it's not a premium shell, no. It's a gold shell. Yeah, no, you're never going to lose that stigma. Sorry. Second shell penetration is going to increase, so that's not the standard shell. I would have much rather seen the standard shell have better pen. Reload time goes down by a bit. Oh no, that's quite a lot for a 130mm gun. The shell velocity increases on the AP shell and on the second shell, the premium shell. It increases by quite a lot. That's quite an uptick. That's 290 meters per second more. So yeah, you figure. The dispersion goes down, so this is a very accurate gun now. And the 120mm gun actually got nerfed so that you actually use the 130mm gun, which I think is a bit sad because I really like the 120mm gun on the tier 9. But obviously it makes sense because they want you to also utilize the top tier gun. And that means that maybe the tank will be played quite a bit differently, because I've seen a lot of them run around with the 120mm gun instead of running with the 130mm gun. So generally speaking, I think these changes, I can get behind it. Armor-wise, I thought that these tanks were doing quite well. But we're going to move on because there are still some more interesting things. Because one of the things that is going to come is the American heavy tanks will be in the next super test iteration. I have noticed that the M103 just doesn't really have a space anymore in the game because basically everyone just shoots the cupola on top. It's very easy to take out. It's not like the E5. And the lower plate is massive. So the M103, because it's such a large tank, was not a lot of fun in the current meta, and it doesn't have any kind of redeeming factors except for the gun. The gun is really great because you're using the tier 10 gun, but it's a bit sad. They're going to probably improve the T-32 because that tank did get a buff, but it still isn't on top as with other vehicles. And the T-29 at tier 7 is actually going to get nerfed. They're going to nerf this tank because it's overperforming. So yeah, if you're a T-29 connoisseur, I'm kind of a fan of the T-29. You might want to play it just before they launch this patch because it might get a bit worse. Generally speaking, I understand what they mean. The T-29 at tier 7 always felt like a 7.5 tank because it just had so many great things about it. It had this awesome gun, great gun depression, it had armor on the turret. You could do so much with the T-29. That's why I can kind of understand why they want to adjust a little bit, because it's certainly, if you would pick a Tiger 1 or a T-29, majority of the player base would go for the T-29 instead of the Tiger 1. If you are not that interested in raw DPM, then the Tiger 1 would be a better choice. But finally, my prayers have been answered. the fuckers in the M44 are going to suffer. Hopefully they're going to suffer. Because they're going to be looking at the characteristics with the M44. This tank is rather effective for tier 6. It's very popular. To reduce its influence on the vehicles in battle, it will be reduced, or it will reduce its characteristics. They will reduce the characteristics as well. Thank God for that. I hate that thing. I hate this tank so much. I've just been one-shotted in the... no, not one-shotted, but I just lost about 800 HP in the STA2 while I was trying to 3-mark it because the M44 managed to penetrate me from the front. And that's a total joke. So, yeah, I'm so happy if that thing just gets nuked into nothingness, because I hate that tank above all else. So moving on, there are also going to be other vehicles where they're going to take a look. They're going to improve the KV-1S. They're going to improve the E8, the Type 58, which is the Chinese tier 6. It's the T-3485. The TVP VTU MT, nice. That thing is going to get a little bit of a buff. They'll improve the 2 French tier 7 and 8 TDs. And they're actually going to nerf the Boogie, the T25 MT, the Skoda, the CS44, the BDR G1, the T67. Oh, and all the players will be glad about that. The T40, the SU76G FT. I haven't played that so often. The SU85B. So there are a lot of changes coming towards us, and I think finally, for the first time in a very, very, very long time, I have a little bit of hope that we might still have a game where the developers try to balance things out. It has taken them way too long, and I cannot forgive them for all of the bullshit they've pulled out, but at least they are working on some of these things. And the Kranvagn is probably one of the most important vehicles that need to be addressed, because these tanks just... Yeah, the Kranvagn is just one of those tanks that, is completely broken at tier 10 at the moment. So, what do you think about these changes? Do you think I'm completely unfair towards all of the tanks, and the Kranvagn and the Emil 2 are fine the way they are currently? Do you think that these changes are dumb, and you would have actually liked to see other tanks get nerfed first, or other tanks get improved first? This is the super test, so everything is subject to change. We will not even be sure if these changes go through, but I think we'll see them in the test server in the future. Hopefully we get a little bit of balance into the game, especially at tier 8, 9, and 10, and then we can have some good few years of World of Tanks. Yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.